High warriors of the grind. What will you choose when the world gives you two options, to dominate or to fade? Will you rise like a lion or dissolve into the background noise of the forgotten? This isn't just a question, it's a battle cry. And in this video, we'll walk you through the comprehensive, electric, soul-punching guide to that choice. Dominate or fade. The choice is yours. Part 1. The Awakening, when life slaps you hard. It always starts with pain, not a whisper, a thunderclap, not a soft warning, but a storm that shatters your comfort and drags your soul into the mud. And for some, that thunderclap comes early. For Rayan, it came at 23. Rayan lived in a dust-covered village where dreams usually came to die. It was a place where time seemed frozen, where the mornings looked exactly like the evenings, and the evenings felt like forgotten prayers. But Rayan? He was different. His dreams weren't small whispers. They roared. They echoed louder than the silence in his broken home. Every morning, even before the sun peeked over the cracked roofs, he woke up to the same heavy voice in his head. You'll never make it. The words didn't surprise him anymore. They had become routine, like the bitter tea his mother made or the squeak of the rusted ceiling fan. But every morning, he stared at his reflection and answered back, "Watch me." He didn't come from luxury. His shoes had holes, his books were borrowed, and his ambitions were considered insanity. People smirked when he talked about his goals. What can a village boy even do, they mocked. But Rayan smiled, because their doubt was his fuel. Then came the slap. Not a metaphorical one. A real, brutal, devastating slap from life. His father's small mechanic shop, their only source of income, caught fire due to a short circuit. Flames devoured years of sweat, savings, and sacrifice. By the time villagers arrived with buckets and panic, it was too late. Ashes. That's all that remained. The world expected Rayan to break, to collapse into despair, to scream, to cry. But Rayan stood still. The smoke still danced in the air, and people whispered around him, but he didn't hear them. He was talking to himself, whispering, "Sometimes the fire that destroys you becomes the fire that forges you." He didn't sleep that night. While others tossed in their beds, Rayan walked barefoot across the same floor that hours ago had been soaked in water and tears. He could still smell the burn. He didn't mourn, he transformed. That night, he made a promise, not just to rebuild, but to redefine, to rise from the ashes like those mythical creatures he once read about. His heart had cracked open, and from it poured something new. Not sadness, but purpose. People started coming to offer sympathy. "I'm so sorry," they said. "Life is unfair," they added. But Rayan didn't flinch. He wasn't looking for sympathy. He was preparing for war. His eyes, once unsure, were now locked with something unshakable. Fire, purpose, a hunger that could not be caged. He went to the remains of the shop the next day and picked up a piece of burnt metal. It was twisted, black, and still warm. He looked at it and said out loud, "You're not the end. You're the beginning." That moment changed everything. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about domination. It was about taking the pain, the loss, the fire, and turning it into fuel. Not just for himself, but for every soul who had ever been told they couldn't. He started selling small items door to door, not out of desperation, but to prove to himself that he could rebuild, even without help, even from nothing. People laughed at first, But Rain kept showing up. Day after day, he learned how to market, how to talk, how to read expressions. He turned every rejection into a reason to grow. And every night, when he came home exhausted, blistered, and drenched in sweat, he'd look into the cracked mirror in his tiny room and whisper to himself, "I didn't fade today." His mother once asked him gently, "Why don't you rest, Beta?" Rayan smiled and said, "Because the world doesn't wait for broken boys to heal. It only remembers the ones who rise." He started keeping a notebook, a journal of war. In it, he wrote every lesson learned, every quote that sparked him, every scar that earned its place. One page read, "Pain doesn't mean stop. It means push harder." Rayan lived that quote. Every breath, every step, every drop of sweat said push. One evening, a man who used to laugh at Rayan came to him and said, "You're not the same boy anymore." Rayan didn't smile. He simply replied, "No, I've been through fire, and fire doesn't leave you the same." By the end of that first year, Rayan hadn't just survived. He had become unrecognizable, not because of success, but because of strength. And this was just the beginning. Part 2, The Rise. Turn your fury into fuel. He didn't wait. Waiting is for those who believe time owes them something. Rayan knew better. Time owed him nothing, and neither did the world. So he didn't sleep on his dreams. While others slept, he built, brick by invisible brick, with tired hands and burning eyes. He crafted a future no one could see, not even him. By day, he cleaned office floors that shimmered with the footsteps of men in suits, men he once dreamed of becoming. He scrubbed away coffee stains and the arrogance of strangers. But in his mind, every motion was part of a bigger purpose. Each swipe of the mop whispered, "I'm learning discipline. I'm learning humility. I'm preparing." At night, when the city slowed down and the silence wrapped the world in stillness, Rayan turned on his cheap secondhand laptop. The screen flickered, tired like him, but it stayed on. YouTube tutorials, free coding classes, graphic design, content writing. Anything that could push him forward, he devoured. He wasn't just watching. He was absorbing, studying success like a warrior studies his enemy, analyzing patterns, breaking down habits, dismantling mental barriers. While others were busy entertaining themselves, Rayan entertained the thought of greatness. When people around him laughed at his dreams, thinking he was just a cleaner with delusions, Rayan laughed too. Not at their cruelty, but at their comfort zones. He knew they were too afraid to step out of the lives they hated, and so they mocked the one who dared to try. Late one night, with dark circles under his eyes and fingers aching from typing, Rayan stood in front of his cracked mirror, the same one that had watched him cry, plan, fail, and start again. He stared into it like a soldier before a final battle. "I'm not waiting for a savior," he said, voice steady like steel. "I'll become my own." That statement wasn't just a declaration. It was a contract. With himself, with life. And life heard him. He started small, writing product descriptions for a local vendor, then designing a logo, then helping a foreign client write blog posts. He was awkward at first, not confident, but relentless. He wasn't chasing perfection. He was chasing growth. Every revision request was a lesson. Every delayed payment taught him negotiation. Every mistake made him sharper, more aware, more brutal with his focus. His room became a battlefield. The corner where his bed stood turned into a war tent. with sticky notes on the walls, a laptop that overheated often, and books piled like shields. How to Sell, Think and Grow Rich, Digital Marketing Basics, Mindset Shifts of Millionaires, titles that looked out of place in a dusty village room, but felt right in Rand's hands. One evening, he received his first big gig, a $500 project. It wasn't the money that made him emotional. It was the email that said, "You've been selected for your professionalism." He looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "Did you hear that? Old world? Professionalism." From the cleaner boy, there were no celebrations, just deeper focus, more hunger. He created a schedule: work, eat, study, repeat. No distractions, no social media show-off, no validation seeking. His validation was in his progress. Months passed. His income grew. His skills multiplied. But more than anything, he was building himself. He walked straighter, talked clearer, thought deeper. Fear had no room in his brain anymore, only fuel. Once, while passing by the same office building he used to clean, he noticed a job advertisement on the door, looking for a digital consultant. He smiled, not because he wanted the job, but because he was now in a position to hire such consultants. His transformation wasn't loud. It was internal, quiet, ruthless, focused. One evening, a childhood friend visited him and said, "Rayan, you've changed." Rayan nodded and replied, "Of course. What kind of tragedy makes you the same?" Quote to live by: build yourself so strong that the world has no choice but to notice. And the world did notice. Slowly, reluctantly, but surely, clients returned. Referrals increased. His inbox flooded. But with each new message, he reminded himself, don't let success distract you from the climb. He remembered his burnt shop, his father's tired eyes, his mother's silent strength, and he poured it all into his mission. Rand didn't want fame. He wanted freedom and the ability to never see someone else cry from powerlessness again. And for that, he had to keep rising, keep building. Each morning, he still woke up to a voice in his head, but it had changed. Now it said, "You're not done yet." Because he wasn't. This wasn't the top. This was just the middle of the climb. The rise wasn't over. It had just begun. Part 3. The war within, doubt, fear, and the voice that lies. Even titans feel fear. Even champions cry. And even the strongest minds can become battlegrounds. Rand had climbed. He had built. He had achieved. But the higher you go, the louder the wind howls. And one night, when he finally hit his first $10,000 month, a milestone he once thought was light years away, something unexpected happened. He didn't celebrate. He didn't dance. Instead, he froze. A voice, not from the outside, but from the darkest corner of his own mind, whispered, "You're a fraud. What if it was just luck? What if this all disappears? What if you fail again?" Those whispers didn't come in silence. They screamed, louder than applause, sharper than any insult. These weren't strangers doubting him. This was him doubting himself. And it shook him. For the first time in months, he felt the ground under his feet loosen. Not because he had no skills, but because he had reached a new level. And new levels bring new devils. He could have ignored it, distracted himself, escaped in a mindless scrolling, late-night junk food, or temporary highs. But Rand had learned something the hard way. Running from your shadows only makes them taller. So he did something powerful, something rare. He sat with those demons. He didn't argue with them. He didn't suppress them. He looked them straight in the eye and whispered, "Maybe I'm scared, but I'll still show up." That sentence became his sword. It didn't eliminate the fear, but it gave him the strength to keep walking with it beside him. Not behind, not ahead. Beside, like a shadow that no longer had power over him. The next morning, he opened his journal and wrote, "Today, I feel like a fraud, but I'm still sending proposals, still delivering projects, still showing up, and that makes me powerful." Every day after that became a battlefield, not against the world, but against his own mind. He understood that mastery over self is the highest form of power. He began crafting rituals. At dawn, he sat in silence, meditating through the noise of doubt. He read books on mindset, watched interviews of fallen legends, and studied how giants deal with internal storms. He started pushing his body harder too. Workouts became more than fitness. They were therapy. Every rep was a rejection punched in the face. Every push-up whispered, "You're still here." And the sweat that poured off his skin became proof. Fear may live inside me, but I refuse to let it rule me. One night, while sitting on his rooftop under a sky smeared with stars, he spoke out loud. "It's okay to be scared, but it's not okay to stop. Not now. Not after everything." He remembered the fire that burned his father's shop. He remembered the long nights learning how to write copy, how to design, how to communicate with clients in languages not his own. He remembered eating dry bread and calling it a blessing. How could he stop now? That week, he wrote a new note and stuck it above his desk. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to fight while afraid. He read that quote every morning. Soon, the fear transformed. It didn't vanish, but it changed shape. It became his reminder that he was in uncharted territory, that this wasn't mediocrity. This was growth. He started coaching beginners online, not because he thought he was perfect, but because he knew what it felt like to be lost. He started writing on forums about imposter syndrome, sharing his battles openly. And to his surprise, hundreds responded. "Me too. I thought I was the only one. You just described my life." That's when Rayan realized something incredible. Everyone is scared. The difference lies in who chooses to stop and who chooses to keep going despite it. So he made a new rule: show up. Every day, even if you're terrified. And he did. Some days his voice shook on calls. Some days he second-guessed his ideas. Some nights he laid awake, wondering if he was really meant for this. But each time he heard that inner whisper, "You're not enough," he replied with actions. Proposal sent, call taken, project delivered, workout completed, reflection journaled. And the voice? It got quieter. Not gone, but no longer loud enough to stop him. Once, during a guest podcast where he was invited to speak about his rise, the host asked, "What's the one thing that keeps you moving when your mind says stop?" Rayan smiled and said, "That voice in my head used to say, 'Who do you think you are?' Now I answer, 'I'm the one who didn't quit.'" The crowd went silent, then erupted. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't immune, but he was resilient, and that made him unstoppable. Part 4. The Crown. Dominate without guilt. Success didn't come overnight. It came over every night. When the world rested, Rayan wrestled. Every no became a puzzle he learned to solve. Every rejection became a stone he stepped on. And every moment he thought of quitting, he imagined the faces of those who were still watching, still believing in him without saying a word. Rayan didn't just win. He dominated. Not with arrogance, but with clarity. Not by destroying others, but by building relentlessly. He didn't compare his chapter with anyone else's. His only competition was the man he was yesterday. And one morning, while checking his inbox, he saw a subject line that would change everything. Your story has gone viral. Over 1 million shares. He clicked it, and there was a blog post someone wrote about his rise. The boy who lost everything. The cleaner turned creator. The fighter who refused to fade. The comment section was full of messages. You saved my life. I cried reading this. I'm starting again because of Rayan. He leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, overwhelmed not by pride, but by gratitude, because his pain had become someone else's permission to rise. But he didn't stop. He knew something deep and unshakable. Domination isn't a destination. It's a mindset. You don't reach it once and settle. You choose it every single day. When the comfort creeps in, when the praise gets too loud, when the world says, you've made it, that's when domination is tested. So he pushed harder, not because he was greedy, but because he was on fire with purpose. He traveled back to his village, the same place where he once sold notebooks door to door. But this time he wasn't selling. He was building. He built a school, not a basic one, a tech-enabled, skill-focused, opportunity-breeding powerhouse. He called it the Spark Center because every student that entered it was meant to leave with fire in their soul. He funded scholarships for girls who had never been allowed to dream. He created a digital mentorship platform to guide young freelancers from third-world communities. He recorded video courses, not in fancy studios, but in his humble setup, raw and real, because he wanted people to see the journey, not just the results. And when news channels asked, what inspired you to give back so much? He simply said, because power without purpose is poison. His calendar was packed. Speaking events, webinars, consultations, government meetings. But Rayan never let success wash away the truth of who he was, a fighter, a learner, a believer in second chances. He didn't wear expensive suits or drive flashy cars. His wealth wasn't in his wardrobe. It was an impact. There was a moment, months later, when a group of teenagers surrounded him at an event. One of them nervously asked, "Sir, how did you do all of this?" Rayan smiled, the same smile that had survived fire and fear, and answered, "I chose to dominate. I chose not to fade." That quote was more than words. It was his entire being distilled into a decision. A choice repeated every day, even when no one was watching. But domination didn't make him invincible. It made him more responsible. He now carried the dreams of thousands. Every time he posted online, he knew a kid somewhere in the world might be watching, whispering, if he can, maybe I can too. That's why he never faked perfection. He spoke openly about burnout, about therapy, about boundaries, about saying no to projects that didn't align with his values. Because domination with guilt is self-destruction in disguise. And Rayan refused to betray his own soul for likes, applause, or validation. Once during a conference panel, the CEO leaned over and said, "You know, you don't act like a millionaire." Rayan grinned and replied, "That's because I'm not performing success. I'm living purpose." The room went silent. Rayan's life had changed. The same streets that once called him a fool now named their learning center after him. Mothers who once told their kids not to be like Ryan now prayed their sons would have even half his courage. But he stayed grounded. He still ate with his team on the floor. He still listened more than he spoke. He still carried a worn-out notebook where he scribbled ideas at 3 a.m. One page in that notebook read, "When you rise, take others with you. That's how you stay on top." That quote wasn't just decoration, it was direction. He used his resources to fund mental health workshops, to provide laptops to remote learners, to build internet hubs in off-grid towns. And not once did he post a picture pretending to be a savior. Because for Rayan, domination meant empowerment, not spotlight. Every night before sleeping, he looked in the mirror, now no longer cracked, and asked himself, did I show up as my highest self today? If the answer was yes, he smiled. If not, he promised to try harder the next day. Because success, to him, wasn't about being at the top. It was about making the top meaningful. Part 5. Your turn. Make the choice on the path. Now stop whatever you're doing and look in the mirror. Yes, you. Not the reflection shaped by filters and expectations. The real you. Behind those eyes lives a story. Not an ordinary one, but one that, if lived with fire, could shake the very ground you walk on. But only if you choose. Because it's always a choice. The same way Rayan chose not to fade when the fire came for him. The same way he chose to rise when fear whispered lies in his ears. The same way he walked through rejection, isolation, exhaustion, and still said, I'm not done. The question is, will you? You can scroll past this. You can snooze your dreams for another day. You can sulk about what the world didn't give you. Or you can stand. Stand like Rayan did. Stand like every warrior who wasn't handed a map, but still chose to blaze a path through the unknown. This isn't about perfection. It never was. This is about being present, about being powerful, about being on fire, even if no one sees your flame yet. Because here's the truth. You don't have to start big. You just have to start. Wake up an hour earlier. Run that single mile. Record that first rough video. Send that pitch to a stranger who may never reply. Say no to that toxic voice in your head. Scream yes to your greatness. You want confidence? Do the hard things. You want freedom? Earn it in sweat and courage. You want transformation? Then give up the illusion of overnight success and commit to daily war. Your life will not change when you get more followers, likes, or applause. It will change when you realize that domination is a habit built in the quiet, lonely moments no one claps for. You want to win? Then suffer with purpose. You want to lead? Then outlast the noise. You want peace? Then destroy what's destroying you. Doubt, comparison, laziness, fear. And build, brick by brick, choice by choice. Rayan didn't have superpowers. He had pain, and he turned it into progress. He had nothing, and he turned it into impact. So what's stopping you? You don't need perfect conditions. You need brutal honesty. You need to admit you're not where you want to be, and that no one is coming to fix that but you. Start with what you have. Build with what you know. Grow where you're planted. Every time you want to quit, remember, there's a version of you on the other side of effort, a version that's unstoppable. But you'll never meet that person unless you push through the pain. Discipline will beat talent. Consistency will beat luck. Grit will beat everything. So when a voice says, I can't, you say, I will. When fear says wait, you say now. When comfort says you've done enough, you scream, I'm just getting started. This is your moment. Not because it's perfect, but because it's yours. You've seen what Rand did. You followed his climb. You felt the fire in his story. But now, the spotlight isn't on him. It's on you. No more excuses. No more hiding. No more waiting for signs, permission, or miracles. You're the miracle. The world doesn't need another echo. It needs your roar. So rise. Stand tall. Act bold. And never let your fears write your story. Because in the end, no matter how many chances you get, no matter how many times you fall, it all comes down to this. You will either dominate or fade. The choice is yours. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.